The night Aisha fled from the palace felt like a lifetime ago. The memory of running through the moonlit garden, the sound of the guards closing in, and the frantic beating of her heart still lingered in her mind. For weeks, she had hidden in a small, secluded village far beyond the reach of the king's men. Yet every night, the same questions haunted her: what had become of Prince Umar? Would the king's wrath tear them apart forever? Aisha was not alone in her exile. She had found refuge with an elderly woman named Nana Halima, who had known her mother in her youth. Nana's home was small, tucked away from prying eyes, and filled with the scent of herbs and incense. In those quiet days, Aisha would sit by the window, watching the sun dip behind the horizon, hoping for a sign. Her heart ached with longing for Umar, who had promised he would find a way for them. And then, one evening, as the scent of burning incense mingled with the cooling air, there was a knock at the door. Aisha's heart leaped in her chest. Nana Halima, her eyes sharp despite her age, nodded toward the door. "Go," she whispered. "Your fate awaits." Aisha opened the door to find Umar standing there, his face etched with exhaustion but his eyes bright with hope. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, without a word, Umar stepped forward and took her hand. Relief washed over Aisha, and tears filled her eyes. "I told you I would find a way," Umar said, his voice low but full of determination. They sat together in the quiet of Nana's home, the warmth of the fire casting a soft glow around them. Umar explained how he had pleaded with his father, the king, time and time again. At first, the king had been furious, his pride wounded, his authority challenged. But Umar had not given up. He had spoken not as a prince, but as a son, telling his father that love was a force greater than tradition or wealth. Aisha's heart swelled with hope, but she knew the king's stubbornness all too well. "And what did he say?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Umar's gaze softened. "He wishes to speak with you, Aisha. He has agreed to meet. But I cannot promise his blessing just yet." The weight of the moment settled heavily between them. For days, Aisha's mind raced with uncertainty. Could the king, a man so deeply rooted in tradition and power, ever accept their love? But she knew she had no choice but to face him. If there was to be any hope for their future, she had to confront the man who had once claimed her as his own. The day of the meeting arrived, and Aisha stood at the gates of the palace she had fled from. The palace loomed before her, its high walls a stark reminder of the life she had left behind. But this time, she was not alone. Umar stood beside her, his hand in hers, giving her the strength to take the first step inside. They were led to the king's private chamber, a grand room adorned with rich tapestries and the ever-present fragrance of incense. The king, Al-Haji Musa, sat on a large cushioned chair, his face stern, but there was something different in his eyes, an exhaustion, perhaps, or maybe the faintest glimmer of regret. Aisha knelt before him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined herself back in this palace, much less before the king in this way. For a long moment, there was only silence, the air thick with tension. Finally, the king spoke. "I have heard many things, Aisha," he began, his voice gravelly with age. "I heard of your escape, your betrayal of my trust. You defied the laws of our land, and for that, I was ready to punish you." Aisha bowed her head, bracing herself for the worst. "But," the king continued, his voice softening, "I have also heard my son's words. His loyalty, his determination, and his love. A love that even I, in all my years, could not ignore." Aisha dared to lift her gaze, meeting the king's eyes. For the first time, she saw something unexpected: vulnerability. "I was once like my son," the king admitted, his voice quieter now, as though he were speaking more to himself than to them. "I loved a woman deeply, but I let duty and tradition take her from me. I have lived with that loss, and I see now that I would not wish the same fate on my son. Umar stepped forward, his hand still holding Aisha's. Father, I beg you. Let us be together, not out of defiance, but out of love. It is all we ask. The room seemed to hold its breath as the king sat in silence, his gaze shifting between his son and Aisha. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he let out a long sigh. You have my blessing, the king said, his voice filled with a mixture of weariness and peace. Go, and may your love bring you the happiness that eluded me. Aisha's heart soared, tears streaming down her face. She looked to Umar, whose eyes were shining with joy and gratitude. Together, they knelt before the king, offering their thanks. That evening, the palace was filled not with the heavy scent of tension, but with the light fragrance of incense, carrying the promise of new beginnings. As the sun set over Zozo, the city seemed to breathe a little easier, the weight of tradition lifted, if only for a moment. In the garden where they had first spoken their secret words of love, Aisha and Umar stood hand in hand. The sky above was a soft lavender, the stars just beginning to twinkle in the fading light. For the first time, Aisha felt truly free, not just from the chains of duty, but free to love, to live, and to build a life that was hers. And as they stood there, the scent of jasmine in the air, they knew that the blessings of the king were not just for them, but for the love that could change even the hardest of hearts.